first off,
Not going, I think it's the top.
no, but I'm still going to watch what comes out. And the last few weeks, it's been a continual stream of pre-announcements and so on. So I think AI and APIs are clearly going to get a lot of attention. There's a little bit of humility about 5G. All right, we recognise that it hasn't done quite what we thought it would do by now.
Yeah.
I think there's some politicians who got a bit of egg on their face after they bought into it too heavily 5-6 years ago, and now there's a sort of, we're getting to where we said we would have been.
Hello and welcome to this special pre-Mobile World Congress pod. We always do a special one, and increasingly we always do it with our returning special guest, Dean Bubley. Thanks for coming back, Dean.
Thanks, Scott.
Actually, in the past, one of the reasons I wanted to get you here, other than the fact that you have forgotten more than I'll ever know about telecoms, is that you're a bit of an MWC contrarian, and that always amused me to have an MWC contrarian on our pre-MWC pod. But it turns out this year you're sort of going, but sort of not. What's going on there?
Yeah, I made a decision a few weeks ago that I'm just going to rock up to Barcelona for a few days next week. I'm going to miss the Sunday and Monday. I'm turning up Tuesday lunchtime, fashionably late.
Right.
And I'm just going to hang out in town in Barcelona.
Not going to the Fira at all?
Not register, not go to the Fira. If the weather's nice, I'm intending to have no meetings I can't do in shorts and sandals.
That's good.
And just basically sit in a cafe or a bar in the Bourne district. And if people want to come and see me or have a beer, that's great.
So you're just letting people know you're around. If they want to schmooze, then it's all good.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of dinner invites for clients.
It's like someone sitting at a book signing, isn't it? And people sort of file in and get their book signed.
Right. Yeah.
Dean welcome.
You don't have to move.
Yeah. Dean will just sign every book. You're rubbish. Love, Dean. Something
like that.
I think that's a pro way of doing it. I envy you. I'm going to be running around doing videos and stuff with Pierre.
I mean, to be honest, I'll probably be writing some stuff during the day about what I'm reading and what's going on, because normally if you go there, you've got your hair on fire the whole time. You're going in and out of meetings every 20 minutes, dashing around. Maybe you get 30 minutes to walk the floor. And I'm like, to be honest, I don't need that. And also the sort of sign your life away with the privacy on whatever app they want to use that will track you where you're going around there.
Yes, well, we know you're phobic to that.
Yeah,
and it's no less intrusive than ever. And now it's basically a prerequisite. You can't get in any other way, even with a passport and the Dalai Lama vouching for your personality. You couldn't get in.
I'm sure they got a VIP lane. They just don't
That's
publicise
true.
it.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't know about VIP lanes. I don't think I'm ever a VIP.
No, you're not.
No.
I can confirm it.
I can confirm it. Not even in this room.
You're a VIP for us, guys.
Right.
You're a
Thank
VIP
you.
for beer.
VIP for beer. Yeah. Well, I got to say, Dean did really well. He went and raided. What was it? A posh deli in West Hampstead.
Yeah, there's all sorts of.
What are you on there?
I'm on a duration, another day done, juicy pale.
Another day done. What does that mean?
From a brewery called Daya, I think it is.
Are we out of the sort of 8%, 9% territory now? Do you think?
Yeah, these are all
we've still got some
5%.
leftovers that are like 9.5%.
We're not stocking more up, are we? Though.
Look at this, and it's not only 9.5%. Check it out, Dean. This is called Hazy Hercules Imperial IPA.
That's ridiculously strong.
And look how big the tin is, compared to even your daddy tin. And check out the.
Can we do a special?
Like necking a bottle of wine.
Check out the alcohol there. Read it out to the audience.
No way.
Can we do a?
I can't even see it. I can't even see it.
9.5%.
Can we do
that's wine, isn't it?
a special episode that we call like the 8% and above episode?
Yeah.
Whereas I have brought one called Bog Standard Lager, which I thought you'd probably
I think that's a good name. We're never drinking this Hercules.
No.
It's not going to happen. It'd be the death of us.
Well, we should give it
do a
to
shot.
somebody that we're, that's normally reticent.
Yeah.
Force them to drink it before they come on the
Well,
podcast.
Just don't tell them.
Yeah, just don't tell them. This one's great. We've been saving it for you.
Can you get the head of the GSO? Get Matt Scrammer along from the GSO.
That'll be good.
We've given a couple of those before.
Don't give it to him. Just put it in a glass and say, "Here's a nice beer for you."
I would have thought the likelihood of him coming on the pod is almost zero, and if he did, he would look very suspiciously at any drinks we gave him. So I don't think that would happen. So yeah, we got tons to fit in, because not only is this our pre-MWC thing, but there's actually loads of news going on rather unhelpfully. I mean, it's probably not a coincidence, obviously. So I'm just going to get cracking into it. We haven't got that much larking about to talk about anyway. Other than the pod, we were very sensible last week. We didn't drink, but then I had a thing with my mates, which went on till closing time. after that pod last week, and then
I thought you'd go in and have one and then decide you'd had enough.
it's my mates. I don't see them that often. I can't.
Beer,
I can't wimp out.
beer comes in threes. It's 3, 6, or 9. I mean, yeah.
There we go. Yeah, this was closer to 9. And then the next night we were seeing some friends back in Hitchin. That went on till 1 a.m. And so,
How did you feel on Saturday morning?
well, I had siestas on Saturday and Sunday, which I don't normally have. But even those siestas are just sort of, you wake up and you go, oh no.
And you fell asleep in front of the TV.
Sort of thing, yeah, dribbling onto my chest. But they're those sort of siestas where you're pleased you had it, but you don't exactly feel back to like fully renewed at the end of it. You know what I mean? I'm still like, oh God. And then I get people. I think a colleague of mine. I won't name them as it was just our chat, but they were just sort of going, "How fucking old are you?" Which is a good rhetorical question in that context.
Does that mean you're old enough to
52,
know
is it?
better, or you're younger enough that you're still doing?
No. What the hell are you doing behaving like you're 30 years younger than you actually are? I think was built into that rhetorical question.
I had a fairly boozy Saturday, so
But you have Friday off.
I didn't drink at all
Yeah,
on Friday.
I figured.
I think I went home and went to bed after.
Yeah, I bet. Because we were knackered. Oh, dear. Anyway.
And of course, Barcelona, you're going to be completely teetotal for the week now.
Yeah.
I know. Every year I go, I've got to do better at pacing myself. I mean, I've got quite a lot of like videos and stuff to shoot first thing in the morning. And, I mean, obviously not sleeping through them is the first priority, but not turning up looking, smelling and sounding like a tramp is also ideal.
I'm wondering
when
if
you're
this is
shooting
going
a
to be
video.
my last one.
You think?
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't like going to it anymore, really.
Yeah, we'll see what you say. That when we're out in the evening, you'll be like, oh, this is fucking brilliant.
I was thinking, and I was telling people that it's my 18th at light reading, but it isn't, of course, because 2 years I didn't go because it got cancelled in 2020.
Yeah.
I sort of completely forgot.
And you haven't been at light
cancelled.
reading for 18 years either.
No, so 10. Sorry, I was saying it's my 18th or 10th
right.
at light reading.
Right.
But it's,
Get them to send you to PTC in January instead.
yeah, that's the one in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good.
It's a bit of a ball ache to get there, but it's worth it when you're
Never been to Hawaii.
I'm so phobic about long haul travel that I'd almost rather never visit a paradise like Hawaii than just put up with
You
the
could go by boat.
You have to go the long way around to get there.
go through Panama Canal.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to go through Suez Canal right now. Might get those Houthis.
Well, that's the wrong way anyway. You don't want to do
Houthis
that.
shooting at me. There's no Houthis in Panama, thankfully.
Might be blowfish. I don't know.
Shooting their blowfish.
Is that how it's pronounced? You don't.
No,
you don't do it
Houthi. I don't know. I heard Americans pronounce them Houthis, which sounds like some kind of STD.
Sounds like one of those restaurants where women dance around in bikinis.
Well, no, they've got Hooters, which is a very retrograde
exactly.
sort of misogynist themed chain they've got there. Anyway,
Very much
let's
so.
not go there. We'll get ourselves in trouble by proxy.
I'm trying to find where the press area is on the map. It's not showing.
Oh, it's somewhere in Hall 3, I think.
Is it still the same as last year?
They say it's
gonna be
moved,
bad.
but last year it was shit. I'm not holding out and basically, if it's not where it used to be previously, where we had our own big section right in the middle of the upper floor, and it's just bolted onto the back of one of the halls, I'm still not happy
Well,
about
everybody
that.
complained on the press side about how bad it was last year.
Yeah,
so this
shit.
year I expect them to
be
keep
bigger.
it in exactly the same place.
Yeah, and reinforce the fact that they don't give a toss about the press.
Yeah.
And then be surprised when we write shitty things about them. That's how PR works. Sorry. You're nice to the press, but in the hope that we'll write slightly less shitty things
My
about it.
normal area of work, actually, and thank you very much, Ericsson, is to go to the Ericsson booth because
Yeah.
I just have so many tables. I don't seem to mind people just being there and having coffee.
And actually, Nokia, to be fair, while they've got a smaller stand than Ericsson, it's still quite big. They set aside a tiny little area where they let the press go, and I've used that a couple of years.
Really, because whenever I've been up there, they've not sort of allowed me through.
That's because they don't trust you to not take pictures of their secrets and write
well.
shitty things about them. And it must be said, actually, talking about Mobile Congress, and then I will steer it back onto it. Having said that we won't talk bollocks, we've now talked bollocks for 10 minutes.
It's relevant to MWC.
I know it is. I know. Well, all the bollocks is relevant. I defend my bollocks.
Don't we all?
Yes, with some kind of metaphorical cup. Nokia's I've set Ian off there. Nokia's not doing its Sunday Mobile Congress thing this year.
It's not.
I mean, not that it matters to you because you've never gone before.
I'm
But
not there
that's what
till
they've
Tuesday.
always done for pretty much as long as I can remember. They had a big Sunday thing equivalent to the Ericsson one we all went to,
Yeah.
but in Barcelona. And apparently they're not doing it this year, which I don't know what that says about them.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I mean-
sorry, I can't. My Sunday. I think I'm going to go for a nice countryside walk, maybe a pub lunch somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be thinking about all
When are you going? Monday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay.
Yeah, no, I just
I'd rather be going for a countryside walk and having a pub lunch, but
Okay, well, we're going, so make the fucking best of it. Right, so what we're going to do, the running order, we've got lots to fit in. We're going to start by doing our, what are going to be the big things at Mobile World Congress, and we'll doubtless, the three of us being on the sceptical contrarian side, be sort of popping a few hype bubbles and that sort of thing. Then we may well, if we remember, talk about the Ericsson thing that we touched on with the pod with William last week, but we said we keep our powder dry a bit because Dean was actually there, so we can compare notes from that.
Yeah, sure.
But that was a pre-MWC thing, so that can all get merged into the MWC segment. Then we're going to talk about something that's just breaking today, which only of the three of us, Dean, has had a proper look at, which is this latest policy paper from the European Commission on what their regulation and their regulatory framework's going to be about telecoms and other tech stuff.
Nothing about fair share in that, Dean.
There's a couple of loose general references, but I think we'll come on to it in a bit.
Yeah,
I think there's a golden line which essentially kills some of the premise.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about that, and that may well overlap with the other big news of this week, which was that the EU approved the merger of Orange and MásMóvil in Spain. Mm-hmm. But with the sort of usual kind of remedies, which is, okay, we'll allow a 4-to-3 mobile network merger as long as you then create a fourth one anew to some extent.
I mean, I see that discussion in so many countries, and we obviously are going to have potentially something. People will look at that as an option here for Vodafone 3. My view is you'd be much better to go from 4 to 3 and then do something with the assets, which is not, can we have a new fourth operator? Yeah. And so, certainly my suggestion I've floated in the UK is if it comes out from the Competition Commission and Ofcom that the merged entities say got too much spectrum, is you carve a certain amount off, but you do it for national projects. So and you can call it national infrastructure spectrum or levelling up spectrum or whatever you want to call it, according to who's in power at the time. And you say, right, this one's for railway networks. We'll divide it into 20 contracts for long term, and you can bid for them. And we'll have this will be West Coast Main Line, East Coast Main Line, ports. Maybe in building, military bases. You pick 10, 20 things like that, and you say, right, there's a 50 megahertz, 100 megahertz, and anyone can bid to run it for 10 years or 20 years, as long as they act as a wholesale neutral host for everyone else.
I think there's. I mean, I don't want to jump the gun on this too much, but I think. Yeah, and we've spoken about this loads of times in the past. Seems to be an overly dogmatic assumption that 4 is healthy competition, 3 is a virtual monopoly, and I'm actually increasingly in favour of 3 because of reasons of investment, and I still think 3 is the minimum level that you need for there to be competition. 2, I think that you get ad hoc cartels too easily, but 3 still viable.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be nationwide, so you can do 3. Plus a bunch of smaller ones.
Yeah, bits and bobs.
Whether you do it regionally, whether you do it in particular industries or for business and consumer, you could go 4 to 3 plus a bunch of small ones or a bunch of specialist ones.
Mm-hmm. So basically, we've got a lot of, in summary, sort of Euro regulation stuff, Eurotrash, yeah. And we're going to lean quite heavily on Dean, especially for the one that just came out pretty much as we were all travelling in today, because Ian and I haven't had a chance to look at it properly. And I only got so far as to go to the rest of my team. Can someone cover this, please?
That is called How to Master Europe's Digital Infrastructure Needs.
How they framed it.
Yeah, it's a very snappy name of the title of the white paper.
And then we've got a couple of other little ones that we thought we'd talk about. There's one that I just wrote up today, which I think is interesting, especially on the topic of Open RAN, which is something we discuss often on this pod, which is Vodafone UK have announced, it seems sort of relatively trivial by itself. They've swapped out the massive MIMO radio in an Open RAN cell from one vendor to another while still keeping all the other incumbent shit in there. And the relevance of that is it's to demonstrate the Open RAN dream of chopping and changing different components from different vendors.
They have much bigger Open RAN news this week as well, in fairness to them, than that.
Did they?
They had a whole swap done that they've announced in Romania.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's a good point. I forgot about that.
Not only Open RAN. I mean, here's the slightly ridiculous thing, is that most of it's not Open RAN. But
right. Okay. And
that would be worth talking about.
Cool. Yeah. Well. Again,
I mean,
we've all just got
together with your little one site that has some NEC in it thing. As well.
Sure. We'll lump it into that. Yeah. So that could be a final segment. And we had one other thing that we thought we'd discuss that we were just speaking about before we started recording, but I've forgotten it already. So if either of you two remember...
Massmobile, you've done
we've done that.
You've done the European
anyway, this is tons.
regulatory stuff. You've done your open round. I think you're all there.
Okay, well, this is tons. So let's get on with it, and let's, as we generally do, pass the ball to our guest first. Dean, you were kind enough. I kept calling you John before we started recording.
John, can you pass us another beer?
And it just shows how I, in certain ways, conflate you and John Strand just because you're both opinionated, often contrarian analysts.
I think the word you used was gobshite.
Gobshite, there we are, gobshite analysts. But I'm pleased that so far, other than noting my previous error, I've continued to get your name right. Dean, you kindly sort of gave this a little bit of thought and sent me an email in advance saying some possible themes, but I'm not going to pick any of them. What's at the top of your mind in terms of like major themes at Mobile Congress that you want to talk about?
Right. First off,
not going. I think it's the top.
No, but I'm still going to watch what comes out. And the last few weeks, it's been a continual stream of pre-announcements and so on. So I think AI and APIs are clearly going to get a lot of attention. There's a little bit of humility about 5G. All right, we recognise that it hasn't done quite what we thought it would do by now.
Yeah.
I think there's some politicians who got a bit of egg on their face after they bought into it too heavily 5-6 years ago, and now there's a sort of, we're getting to where we said we would have been. So there's going to be a lot of talk about
look 3 years later.
Look how far we've got with standalone and a few things like that. So there's going to be a certain amount of trumpeting of all right, we've got there, we're getting there eventually, which is sort of fair enough, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that it's been massively oversold.
Agreed.
And so I think that we're going to see the sort of not renaissance, but the sort of it's happening. It's grindingly slow, but it's sort of pointing in the right direction. I think there's obviously going to be
I don't want to interrupt you, keep your flow, but one thing I want to address, you say it's happening. I still want to ask what it is, but let's get back to that.
I'll come back to that. But I think that even that, we'll talk about it later, the EU document actually talks about 5G standalone in a sort of, this is the proper 5G we meant about. We should have, there's a bit of a unspoken mea culpa of maybe we should have said that originally rather than 5G is lighting up a logo on the phone screen and trumpeting how much coverage you got.
4.9 recurring gene as the Americans. G, sorry, yeah.
So I think there's going to be a bit more of that. There's going to be talk about the fact that fixed wireless access, it's not particularly interesting, but it's actually making money for some people. Mm-hmm. Private networks is a funny one. I think there's going to be a lot of companies with private networks solutions at MWC. If you listen to the US, everyone's like, it hasn't hit the hype, the forecast, or the rest of it. And then most of the rest of the world, people look at it and go, well, we didn't hype it that much in the first place. It's just been a fairly straight line for the last 20 years.
Are you saying that the Americans overhyped something?
I think on that particular one, I work with a lot of North American private network companies, and I think that, and to some extent, it was brought in because your industry groups like CBRS Alliance, which did a really good job promoting it. But I think there's a lot of companies picked it up and ran with it. There's a bunch of analysts who had unrealistic expectations. I've been following private wireless for 20 years, and it's in the UK. We've had spectrum for it since 2006 or 2008. I saw my first small cell in 2001. And it's not quite linear, but there's not been this sudden massive surge of hype and then deflation that the Americas had. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's going to be because MWC is in Spain, which also doesn't have any spectrum for private networks as well. It's all very operator led. Uh-huh. I think people are going to come from it as very different backgrounds. But I think there's going to be a lot of that at MWC, but there's going to be a little bit of mixed messaging depending on who you talk to. So
if I can take it back to the first one you spoke about, which is 5G slowly getting its shit together. That pretty much overlaps squarely with my first take analysis of the Ericsson event we were all at, which I wrote on the day. I haven't checked, Ian, to see whether you've written any further analysis this week, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I did a big piece this week.
Okay, well then you can tell us about that, because mine was very much just like did it in 2 hours and turned it around on the spot. But the two things, just to recap on that, and it'd be interesting to see whether this was a takeaway you had, Dean, and whether or not you agree or otherwise, is they were there was the mea culpa that you were talking about. That it has kind of been a bit shit so far, hasn't it? Wouldn't it be great if they said that? But and my headline was they're calling on the industry to hold its nerve. Like, it's getting there, and and here's what it's eventually going to look like. But their other point was, look, what choice have you got other than to stay the course with this? And we kind of covered that narrative a bit with William last week, because William went, well, they can just get better at doing what they're doing now, which is fair enough. But so, and this also covers that thing that I just mentioned earlier. What is it? So this was the thing I took away from analysis. I borrowed a bit from a pod that I did with Ian, where there's only three, in my view, fundamental generations of mobile. There's voice, data, and then whatever comes next. And Ericsson seems to think that whatever comes next is programmable networks, and that includes all the APIs and all this sort of thing. So I just want to conclude by asking you, Dean, whether you concur with that analysis I did, what else you took from it, and what your thoughts are on what 5G actually is.
Right. Well, I would give a qualified agreement to this programmability. I think programmable networks make sense for certain things in certain places at certain times. So you could say, and whether you're doing it in an automated fashion or whether you're using network slicing with an API access to it for a developer, doesn't sort of matter. The API is separate. But programmable networks, there's certain things you do want to have control over. So it makes sense to define in a given cell how much of the capacity is for fixed wireless and how much of it's for mobile broadband, and maybe in future how much for vehicle to vehicle. So you don't want to have essentially cheap fixed wireless access taking all the capacity for some of your other services.
Right.
So that makes sense. Equally, it could make sense to have public safety, whether it's a slice or a partition. So police, fire and ambulance could get access to the public network with priority, if the private network didn't work. But my view of that is the analogy I use is think about slices in terms of restaurants or food. You go to a posh restaurant and you'll get a waiter in a bow tie come and carve a slice of roast beef at the table side on a trolley. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got the deli counter where there's a slicing machine, or you've got whatever they do in some industrial sandwich factory. And I think we're very much at the table side carving, handcraft, artisanal slice. Maybe if I'm being generous, your waiter is a robot and does all the stuff perfectly, but it's still
a bespoke.
It's a bespoke. It's engineered.
Yeah,
it's not. Here's and I thought Ericsson was quite honest about that and say they were describing. I think the phrase was semi-static slicing, and I think that's very different from this idea of any old developer can spin up a slice, for their random application
via the API,
via IPA, and then spin it back down again an hour later or a second later. This to me, this very much sounded like, here's a bunch of templated slicing scenarios. They didn't actually specify what they were, but I think fixed wireless access will be one, public safety, maybe broadcast video cameras, where you've got an event. And again, they're all selling to sophisticated audiences. So there's people in broadcast who know what network capabilities they need. They're used to working with networks. And I think that you'll see a few of those type of use cases that get templated. They'll have engineering support. There'll be a clear demand for it, but it's not going to be the free-for-all that the people say, it's going to be millions of slices, because there's no way you can coordinate 1,000 slices for 1,000 customers with 1,000 quality levels. The matrix is too big.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm giving you a chance to get a word in edgeways, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, the piece I wrote wasn't on programmable networks.
Okay. Well, you might as well tell us about that now, though.
Well, I mean, on the programmable networks, I sort of agree with Dean. I mean, I think they kind of conflate a few things within that sort of label, to be honest. But a lot of the time, they're kind of talking about the API stuff, the network API stuff. I think this idea that you expose these features through APIs and
these whole massive new B2B revenue streams.
These developers within some car company or bank can come along and do an application that works that taps into those features.
But the initial pass of that essentially is, it's telco version of Twilio. There's a lot of Twilio envy, and I know if my friend
they shouldn't be envious anymore.
There's a long tail of other CPaaS players as well. That do, whether it's around messaging, around voice calls, around things like this stuff. They were saying, we can check to see if the SIM has been swapped recently for security reasons.
Yeah.
Great, but that's not new. And that's not
or where a
that's not
customer
really
is.
It's not really a network API.
Yeah.
It's valuable, but it's very different to this thing that talked about. Was it quality on demand? And that's the one I've got big problems with, because you can't have network quality on demand unless you've got network.
Yeah.
And I know we're on the 15th floor of this building, and I know even
Totally.
when we're standing by the window, I've got 1 bar of 4G.
Yeah.
And so, if you're a gamer, someone can't come to you and say, right, you're going to have an extra, it's going to cost you an extra 10 quid a month for the premium gaming experience. And then you look in the small print and it says, won't work on the 15th floor of the Informa
I
building,
pretty much
or in your
wrote the same
basement,
thing
or
in
in your
a
train, or
comment
anywhere.
piece today. So I think the whole quality of service thing, which seems to mean latency and gigabytes and some guarantees attached to that. I mean, for a start, I think the problem with doing that is people are going to go, well, why isn't it good enough anyway? Because they're marketing connectivity to 5G on the basis of it. They've not said it smells better than 4G or it has prettier base stations. They've said it's a better quality service. So,
and to some extent, it's not their fault that you're on the 15th story of a building which has got probably these really energy efficient windows, stuff called e-glass, which is a Faraday cage. And I can't really blame Vodafone for the architect's choices of this building. Or Informa's choice of coming in here without checking what the wireless is like.
Yeah, I think the other stuff, and it kind of remains to be seen, but some of the, I mean, I don't think any of them sound terribly exciting, the ones that I've heard discussed. And the one that's got used quite a lot, I think, because Deutsche Telekom's already started doing it, is this. A bank, for instance, could figure out where a customer is and use that to avoid fraud. But you can do that sort of thing anyway.
New. That's not new. And also, I mean, Deutsche Telekom's had at least 4 bites of the cherry with CPaaS platforms as a service over the last 12, 13 years. I remember coming out to like 2012, they were doing something with a company called Voxeo Labs. Then they did I think they were working with, there's this division of a company called Gemban called Candy a few years ago. And then they did something else. They've got an investment in, I can't remember the name, but it's at least the fourth go round that they've had with platform as a service stuff. And the big question, they had their, was it Developer Garden, was their own in-house. The big problem is getting developers and getting the right developers on board who actually care, and that you're able to convince to come and use your APIs. Basically, it means you need to have a really big T-shirt and pizza budget.
Yeah. And the other thing I've got, I mean, there's this Kamara initiative, which is supposed to sort of standardise the APIs across all telcos. And
I think there was a release about that today as well.
Well, that's all very well, but the problem that doesn't seem to have been resolved, and you were at the same thing with Howard Watson at BT, where he was talking about this a bit, is how it sort of works commercially, because there's all these people sort of piling in.
How do you bill?
And he was saying the original idea was to have some kind of clearinghouse for the industry where there's one point of payment, because what you don't want is a developer going, well, I developed this API, but there's some application, and then I pay to put it on Deutsche Telekom's network, and I pay to put it on Telefónica's network, and I pay to put it on Vodafone's network. And that seems to be what's happening. They're all rolling out their own API-facing kind of stores. And
if you're a developer, the last thing you want to do is go to your VC or whoever and go, oh, by the way, I've got to hire 17 contract lawyers rather than developers.
Yeah.
So I just don't see it being the huge revenue spinning opportunity for the
quick tangent about what you just said, John. This is frivolous.
There you go, John.
John, I did it that time. Fucks, because I'm looking at an email from him now. John, get out of my head.
All right, John. You could just be doing all right, John. Like, all right, mate.
Yeah, like I'm being a Cockney geezer. All right, John.
Pretend that's why you're doing it.
All right, Cuff.
Is one thing that I didn't write up, but I thought of. I just ended up having other things going on yesterday that stopped me from doing it. Is BT came out with an announcement that said they're doing a deal with AWS, which means that AWS is going to be writing half the code for them. This is me. This isn't what they said. This is me sort of paraphrasing. And so, to your point about how they'll have to hire lawyers instead of developers, well, it looks like they're ahead of the game, at least at BT on that one.
That's
just a frivolous side point.
That's just a generative AI thing, though, that I think lots of telcos are using now.
It's just me being a dick. By the way, while I'm being frivolous, I've now broken open one of the beers that Dean bought in. It's called Daya.
Yeah.
And it calls itself a Hoppy Session Ale, and I recommend it. It's really nice.
Okay. I mean, the stuff I wrote about Ericsson was very specifically on sort of open RAN stuff. But I mean, maybe park that, because if we're going to do a thing on what Vodafone's up to there, then it maybe belongs in that section. I mean, on the themes of of MWC. I totally agree with Dee. I think Open RAN actually probably won't be a massive theme this year. I think you get these sort of big overarching themes, and then you get this sort of low level chatter that goes on. And I think Open RAN sort of falls into the low level chatter this year. The big overarching themes, sadly, I think it's quite depressing that these will probably be the themes. Will be regulation, because it always is. Generative AI, because
that's the hype thing now.
Which is depressing because it's got nothing to do with telecom. It's just something they've imported from another. You could be at a banking conference and they're talking about generative AI.
Yeah, it's just a ubiquitous.
And the other one will be network APIs. Those will to me be the three big themes. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but
I think it's going to be AI more broadly.
If it's AI more broadly, I'd be happier in a way
because I mean the thing I think there's so many touch points of AI in telecoms. It's very easy to get caught up in the Gen AI hype, and I think that's got some roles. Whether it's for maybe for chatbots, although there's some interesting challenges around the risks of that.
Yeah,
it could be for writing code for various of the internal or vendor functions. But I think some of I think I put this in the email. The most useful bits of AI are probably the most boring. Yeah, they're the things around making the radio work better. It's design and planning tools. It's energy optimization. It's the sort of predictive maintenance. Is there a risk that this, that, and the other is going to go wrong? Do we have some? Use it in fault management. All of which is perfectly worthy BSS OSS stuff, but that's unlikely to get the headlines of, we've got our version of ChatGPT that creates images on demand for your XR headset or whatever it is that they want to talk about.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be if you look at sort of people discussing 6G, the phrase I can't remember who came up with it, but I ran with it at one point before getting embarrassed. It was AI native, and actually there's going to be a bunch of low-level AI in the radios doing sort of channel estimation and all these sort of very worthy functions.
Yeah.
But they're right down in the weeds.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's going to be quite a lot. If you go and speak to some of the RAN vendors, they'll probably talk about AI optimization for beamforming.
Yeah.
Which is not going to be one of your headlines, but it's going to be important.
I think if you tie that together and look at it maybe from a sort of top level view, it can be interesting just in terms of these ideas about. Scott and I were actually at a TM Forum thing a few weeks ago, and they were talking about this sort of idea of more autonomous networks. And I was actually chatting with Eric Ekuden at Ericsson a little bit about that. Good name, Eric Ekuden at Ericsson. People should all be called that.
I did once actually meet Eric Ericsson from Ericsson.
That's even better.
That's brilliant.
Bruce Banner.
They have. I don't know if it's just Iceland.
Peter Parker.
I don't know if it's just Iceland, but they have. So Sun as a surname obviously means son of.
Yeah.
And in Iceland they have Dottir.
Yeah.
Which I think shows how much more sort of enlightened they were. Because everywhere else has got son, Johnson and all that sort of thing. But only Iceland do they have Dottir as a suffix for a surname as well.
Yeah.
It's cool, isn't it?
Anyway, the AI stuff, the thing that I find, concerning about this, I guess, and you asked a really good question, I thought, when we were at the TM Forum of Scott Petty, who's the Vodafone sort of, well, he's really CIO, I suppose, but his job title is CTO, but he's more into the IT stuff about, everybody's worried at the moment, and he's even acknowledged this about lock-in with hyperscalers and ceding too much power to the hyperscalers. And he's always gone on about it's very difficult to move things around once they're in. You've got these egress fees and, you tailor things for a certain cloud environment. Does it make sense to be taking AI when it largely comes from these companies as well? And he basically said it's a concern. It's something they kind of have to be worried about. And you have to do things in a certain way to try and guarantee that that portability. But to me, it's like if you look at telco and the internet next to each other, there's kind of like this huge sort of trade deficit almost, that telcos have been importing all this stuff from the internet world, and they're not giving much back other than moaning, really, I suppose, about things like fair share. And it's where it all goes ultimately.
I think it's
a scary thing, I think.
This is why we'll talk about it, touch on this phrase in the regulatory thing. Is phrases like level playing field, in my view, are wrong when you have different participants playing different sports. And in this case, you've got one group that does a lot of R&D, sells stuff globally. They do things very rapidly. And you've got other groups which are more conservative, to be fair, more regulation bound, don't do much R&D. And therefore, there's like one's a golfer and one's an F1 driver.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, so level playing field is the wrong analogy.
Yeah. But just from a kind of where we go from here perspective, and telcos having that kind of sense that they're more than just like other kind of critical infrastructure companies. They're more than utilities. They want to sort of be involved in tech development. They feel they have sort of aspirations to go beyond just being, I know you don't like the expression, but just being kind of pipes into people's homes.
But actually, the phrase you use there, infrastructure, to my mind, is a much more useful term than utility.
Yeah.
Because when I speak to energy companies or someone in the oil or rail industry, they're infrastructure providers. And I think that the commonality here is around infrastructure. And everyone gets so caught up in this phrase pipe, but it's long-lived, yes, assets, increasingly software-driven. That's true if you look at the energy grid, it's increasingly driven by software. You've got lots of sources of power, lots of uses. You've got battery. There's the whole concept of distributed grid, a whole bunch of other control mechanisms, and you've got some real innovators on the corporate side that are, whether it's on the retail or generating or both, who actually in some cases now play in both the electricity market and also in telecoms. So the Octopus, for example, or Breadband's Bolaget, I think the Swedish one. Or there's a few. Yeah. There's a number of companies that are in both of those sectors, and I think this concept of infrastructure convergence is overlooked by a lot in the telecom sector.
Okay.
Whereas I think the energy people, and to an extent some of the transport people, rail is slow moving, but it's halfway there on getting networks right. I think that framing of it potentially is some of the answer to the where do we go?
So sort of using assets that you might have in the energy sector to deploy telecom.
It could be using the poles, but it goes both ways as well.
Yeah.
So I thought that there's a Finnish operator, Elisa, that uses the batteries at its cell sites to help balance the voltages on the grid.
Yes, we wrote about that. My colleague did, I remember, a couple of weeks ago.
And for me, that was really interesting because that's the sort of this example of infrastructure convergence. And I see the same thing, whether it's just sort of putting fibre along the road or track side on a rail network, or it's looking at, can I put connectivity along the rail corridor and either side to 5 kilometres fixed wireless through the countryside. There's a bunch of sort of overlaps. It's not perfect, but I think that type of mindset.
But do you think, because that's really interesting, and as you said, there's not a lot of talk about it. I mean, I know there's Elisa, and there's there may be some other things happening. There's not a lot going on in the UK apart from the one you mentioned, Octopus, which obviously has an energy business and it's got some telecom interests as well. But do you think that's going to become more of a thing in the UK market in the next few years? And, like from a regulatory perspective as well, maybe the government saying you should do more of this?
Well, there's a little bit in the wireless infrastructure strategy the government in the UK put out last year. At the very least, it said if you're planning a big infrastructure project, think about the connectivity aspects up front. So basically, if you're building a road or a bridge or a railway, make sure it's got ducts for fibre, for example.
Yeah.
And when you said make sure, have they mandated it, or is it just a top tip?
Well, that's DCIT. Now, whether the Department for Transport and the Department for whoever it is to do with building bridges has got the memo.
There's the other challenge of things being joined up at the government and the regulatory level. One thing that you two have just been talking about also reminds me back to the primary theme of what William wanted to talk about last week in his book, which just comes down to this more sort of holistic legislative and regulatory and perhaps even commercial environment, although the latter will follow from the former, of this joined up. What is our national strategic vision for this stuff, and how can we help it? So you talked earlier, Dean, and I thought you made a lot of sense when you were going, instead of insisting on a remedy for allowing a 4-to-3 mobile operator merger, instead of insisting that remedy being the creation of another weak fourth one that will inevitably be involved in M&A in fucking 5 or 10 years' time anyway, why not make a remedy that they free up a bunch of resource, principally spectrum, but perhaps also passive infrastructure and stuff, for for national strategic purposes. And this is coming from one of our cliches on this pod is I'm Mr. Light Touch Regulation, I'm Mr. Laissez-faire small state. But actually, when it comes to things like this that do require joined up, coordinated behaviour, then you do need a state, and I do concede that.
Yeah, because I mean, there's certain things that are either technically very difficult, economically very difficult, so covering rail lines in cuttings and through tunnels and stuff is it's expensive, it's problematic, and there's no way you're going to get 4 different companies to all do that. So that's the sort of thing where maybe there is an argument for, we have as a government identified a particular problem and we have an opportunity to create a solution from this merger, and so we will have rail coverage limited or whatever. We'll do a 20-year franchise for BT can do it, Cellnex can do it, Freshwave can do it, whoever else. And then, but the condition of it is that the other 3 remaining operators have to onboard as a neutral host for coverage for their passenger, or whatever it is. There's different ways you could structure it, and you could do the same thing for power along the utility lines, or pipelines, or roads, or ports, or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, you want to put wind turbines on a hill in the Highlands? Okay, no one's going to do that for coverage on the public network, but we'll use the sort of isolated hilltop as another case in point.
Sorry, were you about to say something?
No.
Okay. As I said at the start, we've got so much to fit into this that I'm going to try and be a little bit more strict on the time than usual. So I'm going to move it on. We've touched on AI a little bit. I was just reminded our colleague and friend Paolo Pescatore, another one-man band analyst like you, but perhaps slightly less.
Is he still one-man band, or is he with someone else these days?
No, it's just his.
At one point,
in fact, he's gone even more. He's his principal, or at least one of his main distribution mechanisms for his research and insight and analysis now is a Substack account. And fair play to him. Give him a free shout out if he listens. I don't think he even listens to it, but if you do, there we are. Shout out, go and check out Paolo's Substack. And it's interesting from an analyst point of view because the way he's priced it, I follow quite a lot of people on Substack. I don't pay for any of them, but most of them just ask for like a $5 a month or something like that. Whereas I don't remember, and I won't be indiscreet and say what Paolo's asking for, but he's priced it at a more B2B sort of level. And it's an interesting distribution mechanism for people in your profession for how to sell. Basically, I think in the analyst trade, they call it syndicated rather than bespoke, don't they?
Yeah.
How to sell syndicated stuff through Substack. Anyway, but he shares this thing for free with us journalists in the hope that we'll bring it up in podcasts such as this. And I think his biggest one, he covered quite a lot. It was a really comprehensive, good post that he wrote. But his sort of first one he went is obviously AI is what everyone's going to be banging on about. So maybe we can quickly approach that. Ian touched on there's Gen AI and then there's full.
Yeah, no,
everything.
just to sort of come back to quickly before you move on. But what
All right,
I'm saying, because Dean was saying it's probably going to be AI more broadly, but I think the trouble with the other AI stuff that you were saying is very valuable, but tends to be sort of in the weeds a bit. And how can we make the space station work better and power it down and figure out faults?
Or whatever.
I think that in itself isn't exciting enough for the CEOs and that lot to get up and sort of go on about it on stage, which is why I think, unfortunately, we're going to have this
mainly Gen AI
focus that isn't really very telecom relevant, I think.
I would agree. I think what you'll find is the other type of AI will get wrapped up into automation, and there's apparently a whole bunch of things here as to sort of levels of automation, and then there's this other word, autonomic, and please don't ask.
I don't know that one.
Yeah. Apparently, you get autonomic.
Well, it has a meaning in physiology, an autonomic nervous system. It's the part of the nervous system that you don't have conscious control over, like your reflexes and your digestive tract and that sort of thing.
So it's basically stuff. It's parts of the thing.
I wonder how many beers I've drunk already.
2.
Get on. It's one of those that to me suggests parts of the network that essentially manage themselves without human in the loop. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
So that's consistent with the
level 0 to 5
about.
autonomous network stuff that was being talked about at the TM Forum thing as well,
Right.
where level 5 is a fully autonomous network where you don't really need people at all.
Yeah.
Which you've got intent based in the middle, don't you?
Yeah, and then the bottom one's obviously none. Level 1's like some systems that have got some kind of support there. But the interesting thing Eric Ekerdon was saying was that level 5 he thinks is kind of feasible within a few years. It's just whether you'd want.
Scared.
Well, his position was that we might not necessarily want to do it because it's it's like robots on the streets or self-driving cars in uncontrolled environments.
Or the Air Canada. Do you see the Air Canada chatbot?
I wrote it up.
Yeah, you did. All right, yeah.
Did I write it up? Yeah, I did write it up. So I'll quickly recap on that. Basically, this is a legal case where the actual case was quite boring. Some bloke they have these things called bereavement fares. Which basically means that when you can prove that you're travelling for a bereavement, typically a funeral, then you get a reduction of about 2/3 on the fare. So it's a nice, compassionate thing that they do. Anyway, he went onto their website and interacted with a chatbot. And the chatbot went, yeah, you can book it now at full whack. Perhaps he didn't have a death certificate or whatever. You can book it now at full whack, and then within 90 days, you can apply for the bereavement discount. And then he applied for it, and Air Canada went, nah, you can't do that. And he went, well, your fucking chatbot said I could. And they went, yeah, well, the chatbot was talking shit. And then he went, well, it's your chatbot, so surely it's your responsibility. And their defence was, no, it was acting on its own fucking volition. It's got nothing to do with us.
You're kidding me.
They were trying to say that the chatbot...
I mean, that's the scary thing about this stuff.
I know.
This is what we face
But thankfully, it failed. And the judge went, what on earth are you talking about? Pay up, you nutters. But, I mean, what an amazing defence. And I actually wrote in my conclusion of my piece, they've actually done us a favour by establishing this, albeit small little niche Canadian legal precedent. Yeah. But at least that's out in the open.
Yeah, God, if the judge had gone the other way and said, well, he's got a point in this chatbot.
Oh, the network took itself down. It decided it wanted a holiday.
What are you going to do? Network's going to network. And you're like, well, hasn't anyone got any control over this fucking... And, and the bizarre thing from a legal point of view, it was fascinating because if Air Canada's defence had been accepted, if it had been coherent, A, it exculpates them for anything that their chatbots do, and B, it gives the claimant no recourse because you can't sue a fucking chatbot. So it's a complete, if you think about it, it's a complete legal vacuum where no one's got any rights or no culpability. It's bizarre.
Anyway, yeah.
But yes, that was a fun one. I'm pleased you brought that up because that was just such a mad thing. So yeah, but I mean that's I especially am very quick to sort of extrapolate and reductio ad absurdum when it comes to AI and it's Skynet. Although one of the things I was thinking when you were talking about level 5 automation, where basically the machines do everything and there's nothing for us to do, that's almost a bit more Huxley-esque, a bit more Brave New World, where basically we just get off our tits on Soma every day because there's nothing for us to actually do. But anyway, yeah, I mean,
well, it depends.
Yeah,
it could be Huxley-like, but
yeah, or we just live these amazing lives of leisure. But I don't know, I can't see it.
Well,
it could all go horribly wrong.
Yeah, we'd have to have some kind of universal basic income, or
Don't get me started on that.
Well, there we go.
There's
another fun tangent.
There's only 3 things wrong with UBIs: universality, basicness, and income. And affordability 4.
It's goddamn socialism. I'm not standing for it. What was I going to say? Yeah. So I mean, but it does all come. Like I said, I'm quick to go down the rabbit hole and go, oh my God, Terminator. But the more things if you do get to level 5 automation, things are heavily automated. Firstly, how we got onto that Air Canada tangent was us talking about this, and you were going, well, if the AI is not responsible, then who is? And then you've got the really weird assumption that these things are foolproof. And I think we've had tons of examples with Gen AI. Well, because Gen AI right now, and tell me if you agree, Dean, that it's still basically just a sort of search engine on steroids. I mean, it's not AI, it's not thinking. Yeah. It's just a very clever, very heavily resourced, pre-learnt search engine.
I don't think it's quite the same as some of the other stuff. There's like different strands of AI, obviously, but you can't create a black box with it. That's the problem, I think, with any AI.
What do you mean by a black box?
Something that you can't sort of take apart and figure out. And so, hence what we were talking about with Gabe the other week, which is kind of very far out stuff to do with deploying generative AI and other things to come up with new radio designs that maybe take apart the whole OSI layer 1 to 7 model and come up with it, because we need that to sort of conceptualize the network, but an AI might not. But then you get a situation where people don't know how it works if something goes wrong, sort of thing. That's the danger.
There's also, from a telecoms, we'll bring it back to telecoms, there's an interesting potential risk about AI in that at the moment, all the AI and LLMs have, in my view, reduced the amount of network traffic on the access network and increased it between data centers.
Yeah.
So if we'd had this conversation 3 years ago, we would have been talking about, are there going to be 300 million people using metaverse 3D headsets?
Yeah.
And now we're talking about 3 lines of text.
Yes.
Courtesy, maybe a few images.
And then all the heavy lifting.
And it's not
being done
particularly latency sensitive either, is it?
And actually taking it further, everyone's all that traffic generation, from video streaming and all the rest of it. Well, we're not too far from being able to say, on your smart TV or laptop, I want to see a funny cartoon with a cat, a mouse, some kitchen utensils, and here's a small budget to license some IPR from, Warner Brothers for the characters.
That's a bit like the thing that Pierre was talking about last week, that text to video thing they come out with.
And the thing is, at some point, you might be in a world where you've got 100 bytes of 100 bytes, and it's got an ability to do onboard processing on your laptop or your TV, rather than sending you 5 gig of traffic. You can call it semantic compression or something like that. I don't know if it's going to happen. Yep. But the very easy way of doing it is sending it like only one frame out of every 10, and then the AI locally generates the sort of essentially extrapolates between them or interpolates between them on the end device. So one of the corollaries of the industry saying, we want to reduce traffic, is the AI companies are going to say, all right, try this then. So much for your 50 gigabytes a month. We only need 1.
Yeah.
So
traffic going down is a bigger problem than traffic going up.
Well, no,
it's like deflation.
I mean, we might touch on this as and when. Watch out for that one that we dropped as well.
Oh, that was that one.
Yeah. Sorry. Me and Dean dropped one of his beers when we were.
I dropped one of them.
In the fridge. Yeah. I was going to share the culpability with you, mate, but that's big of you.
I'll take the wrapper.
And I just thought if he opens it and it blows up in his face, that would be sub-ideal.
Well, if it blows up in your face, even worse.
Or if you opened it in my face, that would be an
or laptop. Yeah.
Then we'd have our first live scrap on the pod. So bringing the AI theme from Mobile World Congress back, I guess what we're saying is there'll be lots of more boring stuff about the plumbing and. I think things like beamforming, it's not such a sort of buzzy word as it was a few years ago. But that is still my understanding. Again, I'll completely defer to you on this, Dean, is that's my understanding of how, because one thing that probably will come up is even more spectrum, and especially when we start talking about 6G, they're always talking about more spectrum, and it tends to be shorter and shorter wavelength, which has shitter and shitter propagation characteristics, which means you need to use things like beamforming to make it work.
Yes, and that links into the other thing, actually, which we're going to hear a lot about next week, is outcomes from World Radio Congress and Spectrum, and also 5G release 18-19. So essentially 5G advanced is probably going to get talked about, where you've got
so we're not there yet.
Better beamforming. There's this IoT thing, RedCap, which I don't really know an awful lot about.
No, I don't either. I feel it's something I should have looked into.
No, Ericsson flagged that up as one of the cardinal points of 5G. But if even you are sort of meh about it,
it's like a successor to NB-IoT and LTE.
Which is all fair enough. And actually, the other thing that's going to be next week is everyone's going to be talking about satellite or non-terrestrial networks in 5G speak.
By the way, isn't RedCap a kind of hallucinogenic mushroom? Because I'm definitely going to have to think of that for a headline in the future. Now? A RedCap mushroom. Anyway, could be.
Where does the name come from?
Reduced capacity.
Or capability.
Capability, it could be capability. I mean, that's...
And what's its USP over...
Yeah, it's pretty much what you said. I don't know.
I think it uses a 5G core rather than 4G core. So, firstly, it means you don't need a 4G core.
But it's also more scale.
And you can use all the various 5G core features to it. To be honest, there should have been a webinar on this today for our friend Alex Lawrence, but he's postponed it. Otherwise, I would have had it fresh in my mind.
Right.
Well, I think we're getting him on as well. He's the 6G guy.
Yeah.
We're going to get him on late in March.
Guy.
He's got his event in Kittilä in Finland in April.
That's right. Yeah, I was when we went to Babel Drinks. I had a couple. I was going. Where's my fucking invite?
Yeah, we could dress him up as 6G guy when he comes on.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah?
Pierre did a whole video.
6G man.
Oh, no, 5G guy.
Man.
You did 5G guy, didn't you?
5G man.
5G man.
There was another one, actually. While we're talking about 6G and some of the stuff going on, I think we've mentioned this on the pod before.
I don't think 6G will be a theme. Nobody wants to talk about 6G.
Okay, well, that's
Except for InterDigital.
I do.
that's noted, but it's on Dean's list, so shut up.
No, I'm just talking about MWC.
Yeah, it's on Dean's list for shit that might come up.
That's why people are going to go to the bookshop to see him.
Right, okay. Do you remember the thing that came up? I think it was something you went to, but I didn't. Oh, yeah, it was the InterDigital thing. And those reflective surfaces, those smart surfaces.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm struggling to get my head around that. I don't see how that's at all economically viable.
Well, it's basically a fancy mirror.
Yeah.
Or like...
It's
I know, but have you got to build out a whole lot of new ones?
Around corners.
Well, to be honest, it's one of those things that I think it's interesting.
Bounciness.
It's interesting, and
Telecoms pinball.
it's got quite a lot of potential. It's actually something the UK is actually quite good at. We go to University of Surrey, they've got various demos. But I think that it needs quite a lot of field trials. We also need to start thinking about, if you're going to have these surfaces, where are you going to put them? Are there any regulatory implications of that if you want to start sticking them on the wall rather than on the roof?
Requires a lot of coordination between the operators as well.
Potentially, if you want to have them as neutral.
Yeah.
But it's...
Sort of competing surfaces, surely.
We could do. If you
It
just
just makes it
different
even
walls.
less cost effective. I mean, what does a square metre of this surface cost?
No idea.
And then you're going to have thousands of square metres of it for this to be effective. I just can't.
Maybe not, because if it's like for things like millimetre wave, it's actually quite short. You could probably get away with having them quite small.
Oh, I see. So you don't need to cover the whole surface. You just need to have one little bit of it.
And and if you, this is perhaps one of those AI things that you work out where is best to put it, and if you can essentially use it together with beamforming, maybe it doesn't act like a mirror.
I mean,
but I wouldn't swear to that. I don't know the innards of it.
It didn't get talked about that much at the InterDigital dinner, but it was one of the three things they flagged as that were potentially game changing about 6G. There were three, and that was one of them.
So, Dean, you went in your email. I hope you don't mind reading it out. It's nothing incriminating. You went 6G. Actually, some interesting stuff, but also a boatload of delusions. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Oh, yeah. Well, the first thing delusion about 6G is it's around the corner, and it isn't. I mean, we might get some early quasi-6G things in 2028, 2029. Realistically, it's going to be 2030 and beyond. There's a lot of people who will talk about, from the application side, all this sort of ultra immersive experience, or what was it? I saw the Internet of Nanobio things on a slide recently. I've heard people talk about underwater connectivity. I've heard about people, obviously you've got all the services, terahertz waves. Yeah. I sort of stereotype some of that type of dial it up to 11 as metaverse for dolphins. It's like an interesting vision. It's a science project, but it's which is fine, but it's not realistic. So I think that there's some of the 6G stuff which is it's a nice thought experiment. There's another side to it which is delusionary, where there's people who, and ironically this comes back to the European Commission thing, who think that the telecoms industry is going to define the future of cloud computing and edge computing, whereas in fact it's the other way around.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of stuff that goes into the 6G discussion and architecture is like, well, we're going to be defining the future of distributed computing from the device to the cloud. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure Amazon and Microsoft will get there 5 years before you, and you're going to turn up to the party late going, hey guys, we're here. We've got this great idea for cloud. We're like, well, it's here already.
Yeah.
On the other hand, 6G has an opportunity to fix what doesn't work with 5G. First thing is, same thing but lower energy. The second thing is fixing specific problems. So ideally, it gets designed to be indoor friendly, sharing friendly, rural friendly, whether that's with low band frequencies or via satellite, but you design that in from day one. And I think that there's this sort of cliche that the even Gs are the bug fixes for the ones before. And I think it's more than a cliche. I think there's a bunch of things that if you look back to when 5G was being designed, 2017-ish or wherever it was before that, we didn't know about AI. We didn't know about some of the things we know about frequency propagation. We hadn't realised how good MIMO was.
Yeah.
So we're now looking with much smarter eyes about that, about what verticals and enterprises actually want, rather than guessing at it 10 years ago. So I think that there is a chance for 6G to be the 5G bug fix.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm not the first to say it, and in fact I think some, like Orange CIO said it, I can't remember, someone quoted it in a piece I was reading, and this is to paraphrase him, that the Gs are just bollocks. I don't think we should have the Gs anymore. I think they're not useful. I kind of touched on this at the start of my Ericsson write-up last week.
That was Bruno Zabib, I think.
Right.
He's the new CTO of Orange.
Yeah. I just don't think.
I'm supposed to be meeting next week.
Oh right, okay. Well, get him to explore that and tell him Scott agrees. That will really
he should
encourage
probably be
him.
at their dinner as well on Monday night.
All right. Well, I'll chat to him. That's all off the
obviously
record.
But you can still talk
So let
to
me
him
just
about
quickly, before you respond, let me tell you why I think they're unhelpful.
Why am I keep reaching for those?
Stop eating the Charlie Ashton toffees. You won't be able to talk. Is if you go with my assertion, which prior to me was Ian's assertion, and some people we know insist they asserted it before then.
No, it's definitely me first.
It's definitely Ian first before anyone in the whole world. That actually, in terms of, we got the numerical generations, and we understand why they're, although that was kind of defined by 3G. That was the first time there was a hyper and a G, wasn't there? But basically, we've had two historical paradigms. When voice was a big deal, in the 1980s with brick phones, and then when data was a big deal, which really flourished with the advent of the iPhones and Android. And that was 2007 they first emerged, so we're a good 15 years beyond that, the start of the data paradigm. And we're looking for another paradigm. Granted, Ericsson, let me just quickly finish. Ericsson's looking for a paradigm partly, and William Webb made this point last week, partly because it's in their business interest for upgrade cycles and that sort of thing. But I think that's my reason for thinking the Gs aren't helpful. What we're really talking about is just broader generations and paradigms of mobile connectivity.
It depends who they're pitched at. That's the problem.
Yeah,
because when I was a long time ago, when I first got into telecom and 3G was just coming along, and we were on 3G bid books. I remember one of the consultants at the time, and I was saying, well, how are they going to, what's 3G going to mean to people? And he went, well, they're probably not going to market it that way. And they did, actually. They did market it as 3G. And then that's sort of continued since then. But the reason I think there's kind of two is because those are what consumers see. They see you being able to use a mobile phone. My dad, for instance, who I sort of think is a typical sort of person.
The Gs are just abstract, pointless things.
He goes, all of a sudden I can make phone calls and I'm walking around and I don't have to have a wire connected to it. And it's not even decked. It's like, well, you wouldn't call it that anyway, but you can go outside and do it on the beach. Not that he lives on a beach. And the other one is like, there's the internet on my phone and text messaging and stuff. So those are the two big breakthroughs. Whereas the industry sees these other things that aren't of interest to consumers.
I think it's more just it's a convenient way to bundle up a lot of R&D advances.
Yeah.
They're actually
but some of those things aren't interesting to people, but they get marketed as Gs to people.
That's for sure. But it's also coming back to it, it's a useful internal thing. Is researchers not going to stop researching just because people are not making any money on the last thing that they deployed. Yeah. So there's a bunch of R&D going on, whether it's in universities, by companies, whoever. So in 10 years or 9-10 years is like whatever it is, a number of 3 projects long or whatever it is. It's a reasonable quantum of time to bundle things up. If you think in the past, perhaps less so these days, musicians used to bundle up a bunch of their work into albums. We have, particularly in the US, they have model years for cars where, you've got a new version of the wing mirror and a new set of indicator lights, but you have a new model just because rather than putting a press release out every week saying we got new indicators, we got new windscreen wipers, this is the 2025 version with these 10 changes. So I think that it makes sense to bundle up a bunch of changes, even if the R&D is continuous.
Yeah.
To pick up on your point you were saying earlier about the even Gs being the odd Gs done properly. So that's sort of consistent with what I've just been banging on about, where you could say that 2G was voice done properly and 4G was data done properly, but that 1G and 3G were the start of the voice and the data generation. But what the fuck is 5G? Back to that, what is it? What is 5G? I think we're still struggling, and we're 3 people whose livings rely on them being able to answer this question. We're still struggling to say what 5G is.
And maybe 6G will fix some of the things in 5G that haven't been done so well, but I still think it's a hard sell to consumers. That's the problem.
I would completely agree with you. I mean, particularly because what we've had in terms of 5G up to now has been 4G++. It's been non-standalone 5G.
EMBB.
Non-standalone 5G is 4G with a fancy hat. Yeah, being honest, and a bit more capacity.
The problem with because we came in talking about this with standalone being pitched as the real 5G, is that I still think maybe there's a risk even there of overselling it. They're going 5G standalone is the real 5G. Well, I've heard operators say one of the reasons it hasn't been deployed that quickly, and there's all sorts of issues to do with spectrum and device compatibility. But another concern is what can you do with standalone that you can't do with non-standalone? it's not actually that obvious that there's a big sort of killer
Slicing?
application, as they say. Yeah, but what's slicing to like the average Joe Blogs?
I think-
To the average Joe Blogs,
it's
it's nothing.
like, I get a guaranteed service.
I think
on my little private thing.
flexibility in a broader sense, and I think people pick out slicing as a particular like type or flavour of flexibility, but it's the ability to sort of, if you want to add in satellite more easily, you can do that. If you want to have a special version for public safety, you can do that. It sort of gives you a bit more, because it's
programmable
it's
network
a bit
thing.
more, knobs and controls to sort of tune it and tweak it. There's private networks is a completely separate thing. Is to should they be done by an operator, or 5G standalone makes sense for an enterprise because they haven't got a 4G network to hang it off the back of.
Yeah.
So it certainly gives more flexibility. There are all the different enhancements in later versions of the 3GPP release cycles, whether it's better beamforming, better MIMO, better power management. There's a bunch. Essentially, once you've got the baseline of standalone, at least in theory, you can then add on these features more easily. Whereas before, it was a big, heavy lift to sort of add on anything new.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good. That's not bad from a slice denier.
I think one way that it could have been maybe pitched as a game-changing thing for consumers, and probably won't be now, and I know there's been a lot of negativity about it, but it is IoT.
Right.
Taking connectivity, because people have just been used to having connectivity in their phones. It's in my device, and then I use that for voice. Then I get data on it. Okay, I use my laptop as well a bit, but the whole. I'm not just talking about smartwatches and connected earphones, but the whole story about having your toilet tell you that you've eaten the wrong thing that morning. And now I know that's a bit weird, but it would be something that you could sort of sell.
Being told off by your bug.
Coming back to indoor wireless, I'm pretty sure your loo, like mine, is several walls from the outside of the building. And he's like,
okay, it doesn't need 5G. That's the problem.
Well, it probably don't get the signal either.
Well, I mean, the IoT is probably one of those ones that has just been a massive slow burner. One thing that perhaps, on one level, I think perhaps we're too sceptical of. On the other level, I think if we're not sceptical, especially, then who is buzzwords and them being overhyped. Because from our point of view, as the recipients of countless communications with these buzzwords in the headlines, everything can feel overhyped. And obviously, we've been hearing about IoT for decades. But I guess it has been a slow burner, and there probably there's the odd bit of incremental progress.
I think there is, but it's not mostly not cellular. A lot of it is Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or whatever. I'm sure, it's not working at the moment, but I've got a connected vacuum cleaner and a pet feeder, which is also broken, and some lights which do work.
These are not arguments in favour of IoT, right? If they're both broken.
But there's a bunch of things like precision agriculture with tractors and combine harvesters
and all that.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff like that. But often they're very, very specific to particular, whether it's the home or whether it's industry. And this idea that there was going to be an internet of things. Well, your combine harvester doesn't need to talk to the robot at the mine 3,000 feet down digging out coal. It's like, well,
everything
it's
doesn't
not
need to be connected to each other.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
you have a mining system, you have an agricultural system, you've got your home system. There's probably stuff in this building, smart building stuff, and that's all great. And it all uses the right connectivity for the job. So, for example, if you've got smart door locks, they need power. So actually, it makes more sense to run a wire to them rather than use it wirelessly because it's not moving and it needs electricity.
And we've still got the thing of our tap in this office that runs off a smartphone, and it's been busted for fucking weeks now.
So we still can't use the tap because it needs a smartphone to make it work.
So now they've had to go analog, and they've had to just put up bottles next to the tap, and we can just take the bottles.
This is what I mean by AI making things overly complicated sometimes. It's like people don't understand basic programming languages anymore. And you have to reintroduce them from retirement to work on some obscure thing.
And that's going to happen, isn't it? This BT thing I just alluded to, where they call it dealing with the boring, repetitive tasks. AI will do it, but once AI is dealing with all the boring, repetitive tasks, and no humans know how to do it, we're then umbilically dependent on the fucking AI.
I think it's interesting that Vodafone's got this plan to have all these software engineers working for it, and they're up to 7,500. Was it? I think that Scott Petty said the other day.
Yeah, he said they're nearly there, didn't he?
They're nearly there. 7,500. They're now at 14,000. So they're retraining guys that used to do like normal techie stuff. I think in some cases, and it's like, well, who are the guys doing normal techie stuff then now? Because
I suppose one question I would have is are the new people, are a bunch of them doing security? in cybersecurity? Because if so, that's a worthwhile investment. But
And definitely one that you want to keep some human control over.
That's a great example I heard today about a company, I'm not going to name it for various reasons, where they want to have vending machines on an industrial site. And these vending machines are like industrial-sized vending machines which deliver like WD-40 and gloves and essentially all the sort of consumables like that.
Yeah.
And so they're having a bit of a problem because they want it to connect to the Wi-Fi. But then someone said, well, does the vending machine company have cybersecurity credentials? Are they signed up to all these schemes? And they're not. They're selling gloves and WD-40. They know nothing about this, and it's an issue because those are the sort of thing which actually is hackable. And I'm like, frankly, if it's Vodafone or anyone else, hiring more people who say, well, you know what, we will sell vending machines with a 5G connection, so it doesn't have to connect to the local Wi-Fi, and we will cyber certify them to this degree, so you can put them on an industrial site with safety. Or maybe you can connect it. Cisco can do the same for a Wi-Fi module.
Yeah.
But there's definitely opportunities there. But that's like one machine with one connection.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got to move on because we've got like 30, 40 minutes left before we've got a hard stop.
Is that all?
I know. Well, doesn't time fly?
Having fun. Yeah.
You live in the bubbly dream. I did that while he was drinking as well. I nearly made you spit on yourself.
You really got a spray there, mate.
Oh, dear. Let's move on to this thing that even more than ever, Dean knows more about than we do because you've actually looked at it this morning. So basically, just quickly framing it, and we touched on this in the pod last week as well. For a while, there's been talk about, there's basically two key EU commissioners concerned with everything to do with telecoms and tech and competition and regulation and all that sort of thing, which is Margarita Vestager,
Thierry Breton.
and Thierry Breton. I know, John would, I call him Ron.
Well, ask John.
Last proxy John. He would correct me because she's Danish and so is he. But anyway, that's the best you're getting. And Thierry Breton, which Pierre could correct me on, but let's just deal with the fact I'm English.
Is he French or Belgian?
I think he's French. Wasn't he head of
Orange?
He was at Orange. Yeah.
He could
Still be. Could still be Belgian.
He's good, but have they ever had was he senior at Orange? Was he like
Yeah, he was VP of haircuts.
He's from Paris, yeah.
VP of haircuts?
He's got a very big haircut. He looks sometimes a bit like someone's aunt, as far as I'm concerned, but there we go.
The glasses.
Yeah, because he's got those little glasses that he peers over in that sort of supercilious way that he does.
Did his hair look like that when he was at Orange? I'm sure that wouldn't have been allowed.
I think he was born with hair like that. Anyway, so we got those two, and like to massively oversimplify, they're two of the most influential ones. Although it should be noted that they're on their way out. There's a whole massive regime change about to come up. And again, actually, John was reminding me of this, and he reckons Vestager's days are numbered partly because the political party within Denmark that supported her candidacy before is no longer in power. So it's all very interconnected, this Euro stuff. Anyway, but they so far have been the two power brokers, and there's been a slight sort of tension between
in this
them.
area.
In this area, yeah. In the area that concerns us, they've been the only two commissioners worth talking about. I mean, there are a few others, but anyway. In so much as to massively oversimplify and reduce their positions. She's a bit more pro-consumer and he's a bit more pro-business. And,
right.
Where the two come in conflict is obviously businesses probably want more consolidation, whereas pro-consumer people think that's harmful for competition.
I think there's also an issue in telecoms or networks or in this case, cloud computing as well, where there's multiple different groups of businesses that all want different things.
Totally.
And the issue is do you focus on one group, or e.g. large operators, or do you focus on another, e.g. large tech companies, or third groups like the wholesalers and MVNOs and altnets? Yeah, and so you've got all these sort of competing groups of businesses.
And lobby groups.
Oh, yeah.
I got a funny little story about that, which kind of confirms my prejudices about the EU a bit. A couple of weeks ago, GSMA, Etno, and then a bunch of other lobby groups from like automotive and health and agriculture and whatever sort of signed this collective letter to Europe. It's one of the usual ones they send out every few months going, oh, please throw us a frickin' bone with regulation and all that sort of thing. And I actually sent an email to the EU copying in loads of people, because you go onto their website and you try and find contacts, there's about 400 people. Yeah. So I just sort of picked a few at random that looked vaguely relevant. I spammed them all on the CCs in this email. And I went, have you got any comment on this? Yeah, it's a fairly bog standard thing. Anyway, a day later, when it was already useless.
They told you weren't a proper journalist.
Exactly.
To speak to you.
Yeah, exactly. A day later, when it was already useless, they sent me one back going, these email addresses are for journalists, for general public, go here. And do you know the really hilarious thing about it is they said something like, Dear Scott in black, and then the body copy of it was in like navy blue. So they'd obviously copied and pasted a boilerplate thing to just say, oh, fuck off, we're too busy. And they hadn't even bothered to change the font colour or anything like that. And anyway, and I sent one back and I went, well, I'm a journalist, which is why I get press releases from you. And they went, oh, yeah, sorry about that. We'll get back to you. And they haven't. They're bloody useless. And they've got about 400 people not answering press queries. Obviously, if it had been from the FT or Politico or Der Spiegel or whatever, they would have responded. Anyway, that's my little chip on my shoulder. So I was framing it before I hand it over to you, Dean. And there have been a few leaks, principally to Reuters, about this thing coming up. And a lot of the teasers were like, oh, maybe they're going to give some ground on like fair contribution, which is the thing about whether or not big tech should be forced to basically hand some money over to European telcos to help pay for the cost of running networks. Or maybe there's going to be a bit of ground given on consolidation, like 4-3 or whatever. And anyway, in the end, and this is where I'll hand it over to you, Dean, I think there was less of any of it, but it did finally come out earlier on today.
It's called, it's a white paper on how to master Europe's digital infrastructure needs.
To master it? Oh, we're going to master it.
That was. And this term digital infrastructure, to me, is an excuse for basically saying, well, it's not just networks, because people have been talking about the so-called Digital Networks Act to follow on from the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act. And actually, it's a bit of a random grab bag of a whole bunch of stuff.
So it's just a consultation at this stage.
There's a consultation that's been launched again.
Well, they're like a good old consult.
Which is, to be fair, is given there's European elections coming up, there's not an awful lot that's going to get done until after that's all done and dusted.
So they're getting the ball rolling.
But there's a lot of stuff in there which is not really about networks at all. So there's some really important stuff about things like quantum safe cryptography. Hugely important, not really specifically about networks, it's about compute. There's a lot of stuff about cloud, which is sort of network, but they're trying to sort of, encroach on overall cloud architectures and what goes on in the private networks between data centers. It's not really telecoms or the sort of normal domain of telecoms as well. So there's quite a lot of things in there. And I characterised it. I wrote a very quick LinkedIn post this morning, and I sort of said it as bits that are good, bits that are bad, and bits which are stupid. And the good stuff is cybersecurity stuff. I'm not a security expert, but it looks like they've had someone write it who knows their stuff, and they go into an awful lot of it. There's whether it's on the quantum side, whether it's on security of supply chains, there's a certain amount of sort of sovereignty of, well, can we realistically produce everything in Europe or our own version of stuff? Does this tie in with a CHIPS Act and stuff like that? Someone's actually given some thought to it. And the same thing, there's a lot. In fact, there's a separate document as well on the safety and security of submarine cables. Again, specialist subject, important. It is part of telecoms.
There was that thing off northern Scotland, wasn't there?
And also in the Baltic as well.
That's right, yeah.
So again, really worthy, good stuff. I'm glad they're looking at it. I didn't get a chance to go through all of the stuff on sort of fibre rollout and copper switch off, but it looks like that had been written by people who knew their stuff. Then there were bits which were less good. So on wireless technology, the EU, I think, is sort of misunderstood 5G from day one. And there's a bit of, it doesn't give a mea culpa of saying we didn't understand it, but there was a bit of head scratching of, well, we've realised that standalone hasn't really taken off as fast as we like. And they sort of try and blame it on the single market not being complete rather than it being a hard job to do.
This is totally playing into my prejudices. This is typical Europe. The answer to anything going wrong is more Europe.
Whereas, in fact, the reality was we didn't realise that 5G came in phases, and the easy stuff is basically 4G with a fancy hat, and the real 5G stuff is actually quite tough, and we didn't realise that. They could have fronted it up, but they didn't. Yeah. And then there's a few really random bits in there. So there was a mention of Wi-Fi. Good. At least they realise it's existing. But it's in a paragraph on densifying 5G networks. And it says, well, in future we'll have additional things like 6G and Wi-Fi 6, which will need 2 or 3 times the number of sites. And I'm like,
so they're conflating all kinds of random stuff.
It just doesn't fit in that sentence at all. So I think that there's that, and then there's an awful lot, and Ian, you're like this on the consolidation, and particularly cross-border consolidation, and then there's a huge land grab, in my view, the strategic overreach on two things. One is around cloud computing and edge computing and cloud. The EU seems to have a bee in its bonnet about edge, and basically has a 2018 view of edge compute. Edge compute is important. It will probably become more important, but we need 10,000 European edge nodes or something. I don't know where this number's come from. A while back, someone asked me to work on a project, which I declined because I disagreed with the premise on some of this. And the other overreach thing is the EU wants to take more control over spectrum policy and spectrum management. And it's setting itself up for a fight with the proper European regulatory agency, CEPT. CEPT is the European body of regulatory authorities. It covers 46 countries in Europe. It used to be 48 before they kicked out Belarus and Russia. And
quite right too.
Yeah, and it negotiates on behalf of Europe at forums like World Radio Congress recently. And basically, the EU said, well, it's got 19 non-EU states in it. We should define our own spectrum policy, and
again, typical EU.
And my view is that whilst it does have regulatory agencies inside the EU that talk about spectrum, it's not historically had a great record. So if you look at what it did with 5G spectrum, it pushed everyone to do what they call three pioneer bands. So there's the mid band 3.4 to 3.8, there's the 700 megahertz, and then 26 gigahertz millimeter wave. And at the time, I remember thinking, well, that's not going to happen. It's going to be very either late or useless. It's not going to go through walls. And they forced everywhere, or nearly everywhere, to try and either auction it or give away millimeter wave. I think they sued a number of countries for not doing it fast enough, even though no one wanted it.
No one paid anything for it, did they?
And at the same time, they completely forgot about spectrum for private networks, and they haven't amended the rules in the last 5 years. They didn't mention much about spectrum refarming. So I'm not sure that the EU and Brussels is the best place to determine spectrum management for half of Europe. I think CEPT and the national regulators do a pretty good job. So, I think that for me, there's a couple of good things in there. It did reference more spectrum sharing and dynamic sharing, which is the right strategy. But again, it's the sort of thing that I expect CEPT to be doing. So I think that there's a bit of a bun fight brewing there. But overall, to me, it's a consultation. They're obviously going to get lots of pushback from different parties on different things. You'll have the ENTNOs and GSMA saying, oh no, there must be more in there about funding for the quotes investment gap from people who've got lots of money, i.e. operate the tech companies. There's not an awful lot in it about AltNet, so I suspect that the AltNet and MVNO and tower company and infrastructure community is not going to be super happy about this.
Yeah.
So I think that obviously it's a consultation. We'll see what comes out the other end and who's the next commissioners are. But I think that it's a bit of a mix bag.
The spectrum stuff's interesting, isn't it? Because the idea, I mean, to get to Scott's point, it's sort of what they're pushing for is more Europe, and it seems like a hard thing to do because spectrum's always going to be out of sync, and it's considered to be a critical asset clearly for any country. To have it harmonised is almost like saying, well, let's have one system of government.
I think that there was a line that's saying, well, we don't want to have technology innovations essentially appearing in some places sooner than others. Well, actually, if you look back, it was the Germans who were really early to dedicate spectrum for private networks, because the industrial groups in Germany obviously went to the government. I don't know if it's BMW or Siemens or Bosch or someone, and said, we want to have private networks. And I think the Germans, along with the UK and Finland and maybe Netherlands, were fast on that. Whereas, trying to decide all of that in Brussels, which may have more influence from legacy telcos, and less influence from the new entrants, I think is going to be a mistake, because it takes away some of the opportunity for innovation and experimentation and frankly revision that the national regulators get right. So
all Belgians moaning about radiation levels and not allowing 5G to be launched.
I mean, fair enough. I think they're nuts on that, but it's there's a bunch of things that I think national regulators are much better at, which is trying things out, changing them if they work or they could work better. Whereas the European, one thing I think everyone would agree, no one can accuse the European Commission of being agile and fast in decision making and policy making.
No,
that's certainly not an accusation I throw around.
They're not words I associate with.
Yeah.
EU.
They have many qualities, but agility and speed are not two of them.
So I think that maybe there's a couple of things they could do on spectrum management which would be helpful around the stuff that William was talking about, the license fees, annual license fees and stuff. I don't know how different they are by country. I could believe that might be the sort of thing where there's whether it's at EU level or true pan-European. Yeah, maybe that would make more sense.
William wants it spent on balloons.
Yeah, well,
It sounds like a lot of fun to me. I'm all for that sort of thing.
so, but overall,
I can inhale them and have funny voices.
I mean, I'm quite glad I put a response in last year when they did their questionnaire and consultation thing, which at the time was mostly about fair share, which got booted. But I think I'll probably be putting another response in.
So there's not much on
snarky.
fair share in this
Good
one.
segue.
I couldn't see.
I was just going to bring that up.
I didn't see much in there. I'll be honest, I didn't read every single last paragraph, but when I went through it, there was one killer line, though, which was ISPs recoup their costs from their subscribers who generate traffic by requesting data. So this idea that the Netflixes and YouTubes of this world are traffic generators has been binned.
Right.
They have actually
that's a philosophical change.
Philosophically,
It is. I think it's really significant, and it's one Ian and I have always argued toss about, and I think we largely agree with each other. Is this a pull or a push?
Yeah.
Is the data being pulled by the end user or pushed by the producers?
Well, but it'd be interesting actually to sort of see the mood at MWC, because I remember that being one of the other themes last year. Actually, on the regulatory side, everybody was talking about. I think even so, I went to a dinner with a big operator that shall remain nameless, but you can probably figure out who it is from who we were talking about earlier. And
tell me which night it was. I'll know exactly.
And the CEO from that company was like specifically raised the topic of fair contribution at the kind of press dinner and made a big thing about it. So
it was nonsense. I mean, to be honest, if you watch a movie, it's a movie, and whether you download it off of Amazon Prime, Netflix, or Dean's Streaming Limited, it's still 4 gig or whatever the number is. In fact, probably
when is that launching?
Yeah. And the problem is that.
And what kind of movies would you have on it? And
what CDN would I use? Perhaps was the phrase you're looking for.
That was it. That was it. Thank you for correcting me, Dean. But you're still pulling it, and if you're not demanding that of the network, the demand isn't there.
Yeah, and it fundamentally doesn't matter if I order it from Netflix or Prime or Brussels Streaming Inc.
Yeah, exactly. And I can see why it'd be tempting, because the only reason this thing comes up is because you can identify a very small number of people who, in terms of the content that is demanded by us consumers, comes from a very small number of originators. That's the only reason this exists. If the SVOD market, subscription video on demand market, was much more fragmented, we wouldn't be having this fucking conversation in the first place.
I mean, the irony is, of course, we are creating user-generated content right now.
Well, indeed.
We're the generating content. We're not generating traffic.
Yeah, and do we get billed for it? Obviously not, because us or even Informer isn't a big enough producer. But that's what I mean. Yeah. And actually, Europe's tried this. It's not necessarily directly related to this issue, but it's tried this issue of having a cut-off point of like who's a gatekeeper or something. There's all these sort of things, but it's very arbitrary.
Yeah, and the thing is that you probably post this on YouTube and
SoundCloud and all that.
Yeah, whereas actually it's you pushing it out, and you're not the ones who are going to be paying the bill, or even BBC probably.
Yeah, and also furthermore, I mean, the other point is we're producing this content for free. For whatever purposes. I mean, as people listen to it, well, no, we don't even monetize it. We don't even have ads on it. That's another matter. But then it does generate this traffic, and there's two things about it. Firstly, we're adding to the general common richness of the internet by doing our little bit and throwing this content into the ether. Yeah. And the second thing, which has always been an irony of this fair contribution debate, is obviously they do want there to be a nice lot of demand for traffic. If there wasn't us and on a much grander scale big SVOD giants, then where would be the need to subscribe to them at all? No. So they're trying a real sort of high wire act on this as well.
Particularly because you'll notice that all the fixed line operators are pretty quiet on all this, because they know it's a hard enough job selling people 100 meg gigabit speeds broadband anyway.
Yeah. Uncapped.
And actually on the fixed network, traffic doesn't really alter the cost structure. Once you've got fibre and you've got switches, occasionally you'll need to buy some more.
To be fair to you, you've been making for years, and the first time I heard you say it, I was like, well, of course, it's so. That's the nub of it.
Yeah, you might need it. Yeah, it's just slightly different than some of the things that John and Roslyn talk about in the US, where you've got rural communities where you've got, 50 miles to the nearest town, and so actually buying an extra sort of, 10 gig line for the what's called the middle mile might be expensive, but it's a matter of degree. It's still not huge.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me, John. And then I'm going to move it on because we're running out of time. We've got one more segment we want to talk about. So John sent me and Nick Wood, one of our writers who's been covering the stuff that we refer to, like the leaks through Reuters. And we had a little exchange. And then when this came out, he sent his first quick take. And there's loads of stuff there, so I can't really do it justice. But his essential point, and some of it is a bit John, and I say this with affection, John, it's like I've been saying this for fucking years. But then he probably has, as of you. And then he goes, sitting in my chair and having sat in it for many years, it looks like a nice farewell from the current commission, which admits that the problems that existed when Thierry Breton and Margarita Vestager became commissioners are still there. And I think he makes a good point there. And it was him that flagged up to me that her days are numbered because he knows about the Danish political environment. But then he points out that 10 years ago, they did a 2014 report, and just looking at the URL, and reading between the hyphens, the EU's broadband and telecom policy is not working. Europe is falling further behind the US. So he wrote that 10 years ago, and his assertion is that we've done fuck all to change that situation. I mean, I'm sure he's saying a lot more than that. I'm just quickly
Are we falling
summarising.
behind the US?
Well,
is it accurate though that because that's always the cliche, isn't it? Oh, Europe's falling way behind China and the US.
Broadband and telecom policy. So I think we're definitely behind a lot of East Asia, China, South Korea.
In terms of what though? What do you mean behind?
Well, yeah, that's a really good point. But I mean, off the top of my head, you've got coverage, capacity. Regulation.
I think coverage. I think one of the things Europe's not great on is things like it's basic stuff like permits of digging up the road to put fibre in, or your point about Brussels not being able to put 5G.
I'd push back on America being included in that though.
No, fair point. And I'm not saying that John has said that. I'm just quickly me summarising on the fly.
One of the biggest operators in America, Verizon. I know how many radio sites they have, radio masts they have, and it's 90,000. Those are the number of macro sites that Verizon has.
Does that include the ones where they're using third-party tower companies?
Well, that's their footprint, as far as I'm aware. So, it's. I mean, Deloitte did some really interesting research where they were looking at sort of cells per 100,000 people or whatever.
I think there's some interesting numbers on that. I'm always curious whether people count apples for apples. For example, in China, there's an awful lot of in-building systems which are probably fed by small sites. Or they have a base station in the basement, or feeding a DAS system. Do they add that in? I don't know. Does Verizon add it into their number? I don't know. So I'm always wary about the direct comparisons based on press release numbers.
Yeah, but I'm also sort of skeptical of this notion that America's got like brilliant 5G coverage everywhere, and it's all
and that his regulatory environment is necessarily that bit more permissive, which is the broader point I think.
Well, I
John's making is that we. I think his argument, and again, I'll give this caveat one more time. I've quickly scanned his one email. I'm just doing it on the fly on this pod. I could be misrepresenting him, but I think his basic point is, look, we still haven't really loosened things up enough. We're still making it a bit too difficult for us to compete with the other big economic blocks in the world. Yeah. And now, you may well be right that actually America's pretty shit as well. But that doesn't mean we're not shit in Europe.
I mean, the big argument is on which we can. It might be a neat segue to talk about Orange and MásMóvil, but it's about
we haven't done that
number of telcos, isn't it, in a particular area. And this idea that, four's too many, and especially when you've got loads of MVNO competition there. This is a big argument in the UK that's being made at the moment with the Vodafone and Three potential merge, that they can't make a return on investment because they've got all these build-out costs, but they have, you split the number of customers up between four operators, and obviously some are going to have not very many at all, and they just don't have enough to sort of cover the cost of capital employed, or whatever the metric is. Whereas in China you've got three big ones, in the US you've got three big ones, and you notice that ARPU tends to be a lot higher there in the US market, for instance.
Which from Vestager's point of view is bad, because it means that consumers are getting rinsed a bit more.
It's bad for consumers, although people pay for it. So
on the other hand, Japan and Korea seem to do all right, and Korea's got a population of, I don't know, what is it, 50 million as well?
Yeah.
They've just got 3 of
Well,
them.
they've got 3 though in their
fair
career.
point. Yeah,
I suppose
They've got-
Japan's got 4, but it's one of them is pretty,
KT, SKT,
one of them is pretty
and U+.
ineffective.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of sort of function, but the Europe, each country has its own operators. So in theory, there's no reason why France should be any different to South Korea in terms of competitiveness between the operators.
In principle, yeah.
Based on the numbers.
Except that,
Yeah, well,
going full circle, except that the EU won't let them have just 3 operators.
France has got 4, hasn't
Yeah,
it?
true.
So the France thing, and this was quite early because this was a good decade and a half ago, I think, or at least a decade plus ago, where they allowed they enabled free mobile.
Yeah, you're right.
And that obviously lowered ARPUs because you got this price competition. Because obviously if you're a new challenger MNO, your only real bid. I mean, maybe there are others, but the only one they ever seem to try is the race to the bottom. We're cheaper than those other fuckers.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
And usually that's because they've got no legacy equipment and no legacy software, so they can go out buying the latest, most automated AI-driven, whether it's Open RAN or anything else.
Yeah.
They can go and buy a nice new fresh OSS BSS stack without 20 years of sediment.
The slight flaw in the argument as well is that the biggest country in Europe only has 3.
Germany. Yeah.
I mean,
If we don't count, what's his name?
1&1 with its 20 sites or
It's
whatever
20
it is.
sites, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going
It's
to.
a bit like
They've got
Dish.
I'm not gonna count
3.1
them,
operators. Yeah.
So,
I'm not gonna get into the Orange Massimo Mobile, partly because we kind of covered it a bit in our various chats. But that is the big news of the week, and it was an interesting move policy-wise from an EU point of view that they let it go through, but it was with the condition, and it's interesting. So Telefonica, Andrew wrote up a Telefonica blog for us today where Telefonica commented on it, and I thought, well, they're going to moan because they're going to say you shouldn't let it go through because they've got vested competitive interests in Spain. But actually, it's quite the contrary. They moaned that there were as many strings attached to it as there were because they're coming at it from a more strategic regulatory point of view. Whereas, they're going, the EU's missed an opportunity to not attach so many strings and make it clear that that they're going to have a slightly more laissez-faire policy. So that's just the last thing I want to say on that. But I am going to move it on just because we want to cover one more thing, and we've got like 10 or 15 minutes to do it. So very quickly, I'll frame it up, and I might pass it to you first, Ian, as you've also written about other Open RAN stuff, and you're our VP of Open RAN on this pod anyway. But the thing I wrote today was that Vodafone in the UK, they've been going on about Open RAN for a while. They started up a little thing down in Devon a few years ago, which led me to write a headline that had faulty towers in it with a double meaning. Yeah, forgive me.
I like that.
And anyway. And then they rolled out Open RAN, or at least wrote Open RAN compatible stuff across about 2,500 sites.
No, they haven't.
Oh.
They haven't rolled out Open RAN across 2,500
Go on
sites.
and correct me.
They've done a golden cluster in Torquay where
Right.
Fawlty Towers is filmed of about 20 sites.
Hence the headline. Right.
And then a few months ago now, said we're beginning our commercial rollout. How many sites they have?
It's more than a few months ago. It's the end of last August. That's when I wrote the
That's
story.
when they started their commercial rollout.
Oh, I see. But you're saying you're not convinced they've got very far.
Well, the plan was announced 2 years ago. The
Yeah.
plan to do all of this, and then last August, which isn't very long ago, they eventually said trials are finished on the 20 sites.
No,
They started in the
expanding.
2,500 site swap out. I suspect if you ask them, most of that's still on Huawei.
I see.
The vast
But you
majority of
suspect,
those
so you don't know. This is your gut feel.
The vast majority of those 2,500 sites will be on Huawei. I just don't my name on it. They won't have swapped
You'll
them
stake
out
your
since
reputation on it.
August. I mean, BT's swapping to purpose-built entirely, and they've still got thousands of Huawei sites in.
All right.
So
Okay, cool. Well, that's a good one. And if
But
goes
they've
in
begun-
Jamie, former podcast regular.
they've begun their commercial rollout of Open RAN, and they have until then. And their only target, by the way, for getting to that 2,500, which I also suspect means they'll probably move quite slowly, just because of capital constraints, is to get to the end of 2027 and have it all swapped.
All right. Well, that is
So
a
they're
slow
not
burn.
under any immediate pressure to
No.
actually do it.
Okay, cool. Well, that's all good stuff and noted. But the point they're making today is one of their sites, probably in this original golden cluster or
One
whatever.
site.
All right, let me finish before you throw in some more of your skepticism. Is that they have, when they first rolled it out, the radio and the software was Samsung, And then there are other bits and bobs, I can't remember off the top of my head, where there are various other stakeholders. Let's just reiterate, part of the point of Open RAN is to have various different vendors all involved in the RAN environment, because the interfaces between the bits and bobs are open, which enables this. And so they had all these other people, but now the big deal today is that they've swapped out, and they didn't explicitly say Samsung, this is my conjecture, but I think it's fairly safe from previous announcements they've made. They swapped out the Samsung radio and put in an NEC massive MIMO.
Well, they've probably taken out, I mean, if it's just one site, it doesn't really matter anyway. I doubt they would roll out a lot of Samsung equipment and take them out and put in NEC.
Okay, but their point, and
yeah.
it's a point well made, but their point is this proves that point where you can just treat it like Lego blocks, and you can just stick new bits in.
Except you can't, because that's bullshit.
Okay,
even they say that, actually.
Go on.
So the open interfaces don't make it. They don't take away all the pain and heartache of actually trying to get to a baseband, software to work with a radio. You still got a huge systems integration job to do, which they're doing themselves. They're playing that systems integration role, but that's very hard. It's not plug and play, and probably never will be.
So it's probably a bit more like a fixed price menu, where essentially what they've done is they've just swapped out
the culinary metaphor.
They've just swapped one of the main courses for another, but they haven't brought in a completely new one off. Where the chef's kind of dreamed it up overnight.
I mean, this is what Ericsson means by we're the ones who can industrialize Open RAN, because so AT&T's estimate, AT&T was at this Fuse event last year that I think Dean was probably at as well, where they were talking about how much they think Ericsson and Nokia spend on research and development each year. And I think he said he put out a figure of about $3 billion in Ericsson's case on the RAN. And he said about $1 in $3 of that is integration and validation. I mean, even Nokia, I spoke to Mark Atkinson on the record a while ago, and he was like, the amount of effort that goes on, even in your own company, to get baseband working with radio is a lot, yeah? So one site is all very well, but to actually make this work well and make it work at scale is another matter.
And it's probably a pre-certified, pre-tested model. It's not like they've bought some strangely branded thing off Amazon. It's like, oh, that broke. We get one delivered off Amazon for tomorrow.
And then
it's not like that. It's like, well, we've tested these in the lab, and we've got version A and version B. Both have been tested and certified, and we've gone from A to B. It's not Z or C.
And so the other interesting thing is that, as well as the big news from Vodafone this week on Open RAN was this Romania update.
Yes.
Where
take that from the top, because we haven't mentioned it.
So the backstory, which wasn't in the release, but the backstory is that they're incredibly dependent on Huawei Vodafone across Europe, one of the most heavily Huawei dependent operators, which unsurprisingly would be why they kind of pushed back so fiercely against the idea of restrictions when it was being talked about a few years ago. Romania, to bring John into it again, he's not here, but John Strand's really good 4G report on who uses Huawei and what's the percentage in each network identifies Vodafone Romania as being 100% reliant on Huawei. So the whole of the radio access network was Huawei. And they've admitted, when I was querying Simon Gordon actually earlier in the week about it, that they are moving it's a whole network swap.
Okay.
But what they're doing is very, very similar to what they did. It's like a template almost in the UK. So the UK is mainly going to Ericsson across about 80% of the network. It's going to be Ericsson purpose-built, not Open RAN.
Right.
And then you have it's 2,500 sites that are this Samsung kind of Open RAN deployment, where it's mainly going to be Samsung software and Samsung radios. But as you've said, there's an opportunity to bring in NEC or other third-party radio suppliers. What they're doing in Romania looks really similar. So Ericsson's basically picked up 80% of these urban sites, and Open RAN with this exact same template. So Samsung doing software, Samsung doing radios, Wind River being the underlying containers as a service platform, Dell servers, with Intel chips. That's the kind of template. Is doing the other 20%, and then they've got the rural areas to think of. The interesting thing about the rural areas is that it sounds like they want to go into some kind of network sharing deal with Orange, and I think they've trialled Open RAN with Orange in those communities anyway. So I suspect that'll probably be the same thing. But it's the weird thing is if all Vodafone does, because they've got this huge thing they keep promising of this 100,000 site tender, we're going to and make a big announcement fairly soon about swapping out loads of equipment in Europe, and they've got this target to have 30% Open RAN by 2030 across the whole footprint. If all it turns out to be is this one template of Samsung doing baseband and radio, and Wind River being the underlying CAS platform. By the way, Wind River doesn't support anything else. It just supports the RAN software, which almost raises a question why you're virtualizing in the first place. Because if you're going to keep your core and your other, functions on other platforms, then you're not getting some of the benefits there. And then Dell and Intel servers, it's like a cocktail. It's like a cocktail menu with one drink on it. Yeah.
Okay.
Or it's like some cocktail bars that they have pre-mixed cocktails.
That is exactly what it is.
And actually, sometimes they're very good. Was it White Lion and a few of the without going on a mixology rant. But I think the interesting thing here is there's different objectives for Open RAN. There was can we create a flourishing ecosystem of small startups? And then there was the more government one of we don't want to get stuck with either a duopoly or and essentially if the answer is we've got Samsung and a bit of NEC
totally.
Fujitsu, we've got that box ticked.
I agree.
And so the government cybersecurity people are like, we'd prefer to have 8 or 9, but we'll do with 4 or 5. That's fine.
And I can see that argument. I just wonder whether I don't think Vodafone would go along with that. They probably insist they're doing. But the trouble is then. The difficulty for them is that if they want to be the systems integrator, which they do, to have to do what someone like Ericsson does, or even NTT Docomo, which is actually an operator, but it's done this for a long time. They're trying to pitch themselves as a systems integrator and have lots of combinations. It's quite a hard thing to do.
I don't know what Ericsson's done as a sales strategy, but it wouldn't be surprising if they've gone along and said, and almost like done Open RAN as a risk management. Say, look, we can sell you these things, and if something nasty happens, like it breaks or whatever, here it proves you can swap it out with A and B.
Yeah.
We prefer you didn't buy it all from us for now, but you got a backup plan if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
If I was talking about sales strategy, that's not bad. But
that's the thing. So Ericsson's thing. Actually, my piece on Ericsson was very much about their whole kind of overhaul of their market approach, as they put it, which is that operators used to come and buy things on a geographical basis. It was like you have Ericsson covering this part of the country and Nokia covering the neighbouring bit, and they're kind of like there's two suppliers in the network. With Open RAN, it's going towards horizontal layers, and they seem to be thinking about it as though there needs to be like one horizontal platform on the kind of software side doing sort of SMO and DU software, and then and this is very much how the AT&T thing seems to be set up to work, that you have those two as your kind of underlying platform, and then you bring in other radio vendors that can work with you. And the trouble with trying to introduce more DU suppliers or other SMO kind of suppliers is that you then are kind of increasing the number of suppliers in the mix altogether. And that usually, this is Neil McRae's always gone about this in the past, you usually then end up paying more money and it becomes more complicated.
In other words, if I'm listening to that and I'm just thinking off the cuff, modularity in hardware is easier than modularity in software. Yeah, it's like you can plug a new hardware element in, but actually trying to plug in a new chunk of software and rip something out, that's much different.
And that's where you get these baffling PowerPoint slides with loads of rectangles with bits of middleware that stitch it all together.
I mean, this is certainly what AT&T seems to be doing, because they use this expression at their thing that we were at quite a lot in interviews with me and on stage, the AT&T single vendor deal. I mean, AT&T it's not quite a single vendor deal in that Fujitsu's in the mix and there's this opportunity to bring in other radio vendors, but certainly the assumption is that Ericsson's doing the whole underlying DU and probably all the SMO stuff as well. Frederick Yedling said to me that's kind of where these things start, is with a horizontal platform underneath that you can then bring radios into.
Did they use at the Ericsson event? I don't think the RIC got mentioned at all.
It didn't, no.
No,
because I don't think it's very interesting.
I'll second that as well.
Yeah, I think it's another one of these things like, you can have some whizzy features like powering down radios at night with, when
Nokia's just come up with a new improved version of that.
And some things like this, the RIC, network APIs, network slicing, they all sort of fall into this same category to me of trying to make features of the network more interesting than they actually are, I think.
Which kind of goes full circle, and it's a good point because we really do have to wrap it up because we've got a hard stop. Kind of goes full circle to the theme at the start of what the fuck is the point of 5G? And the answer is it's complicated. There is a point, but there isn't a coherent point that even us who do it for a living can neatly encapsulate. And it's lots of bits and bobs and tweaks and that sort of thing.
And to be honest, I would say that's a good thing, because if you go back 5 years, everyone was saying 5G will save the world. It's the most important thing since electricity and all the other slogans. And actually, the truth is, it's a bunch of individually fairly boring things that collectively are moderately boring, but moderately
quite
useful.
handy.
Yeah. It's the way I use Frodo is just another G.
Yeah, right. And I will to sign off there. I think we shouldn't have any more fucking G's. But there we go.
Except for Kenny.
Kenny G, what, the saxophone guy? That was out of left field. All right, cool. Well, we'll wrap it up there. I hope that gives you a little preview of Mobile World Congress. We'll all be there in different forms. Ian and I will be pacing around the Fira, and Dean will be swanning around in a bar somewhere.
Yeah, maybe a cafe earlier in the day.
A cafe earlier in the day, yeah, until midday, and then you hit the ground running.
Caffeine, alcohol, maybe some tapas. Sounds about right.
The old legal speedball. You can't argue with it. So maybe we'll see you there, but hopefully this has set it up, and then you won't hear from... we'll be recording one live from the show as we usually do, so make sure you join us for that one.